Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Chuck Mason, and with me today is my co-host, Janell Blue. Janell is the president of our sponsoring organization, the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society. And Janell and I have been talking about a number of things, and today we decided to talk about one of her subjects, which is casual research. So what exactly do you mean by casual research? I have my own idea.
Well, so I'm sure you've run into this too. I mean, talking about genealogy is a great icebreaker anywhere you go, right? And I was in a shop recently, and I mentioned something about the fact that I was into genealogy, and the shopkeeper said, "Oh, I just had my genealogy done, and I'm related to a king that lived in the 800s." And I said, "Well, gee, that's really something. How did you do that?" And she said, "Well, a lot of it was through Ancestry. You know, we signed up for Ancestry and we worked on it." And she said, I had a little help from a research company, but, you know, we were able to pretty much take care of that." And so I said, "Well, how long did that take you?" And she said, "Oh, about 6 months." So I, paid for what I was buying, and I left, and I thought, oh my goodness. This is casual research. This could be a case of casual research, and the idea that people really want to have that royal connection, and I'm not sure what it's never going to get you an invitation to the Queen's Ball, but anyway, I would tell you that there are two things that have promoted this casual research, and one is the advent of the genetic testing. The DNA now is available to anyone who wants to pay $50, $100, whatever it is, depending on the test. And you can get all kinds of information on genetics. And then also, of course, the advent of Ancestry. And I've mentioned in another show that's kind of how I got started, was just doodling around on the Ancestry because it was a lot of fun, and I wanted to see the names of my ancestors and did they show up, and I don't know if they were the right people or not, but...
Well, and Ancestry's advertising irritates me in some respects because the ads lead people who don't know anything about genealogy to believe that they can just type their name into a computer and up everything is going to pop. Mm-hmm. And I had a man, as most of our viewers have heard at one point or another, I teach for Fairfax County Adult Education, and I teach genealogy. And I have people that come in, see the Ancestry's ads, think, well, there may be something more that I can learn, so they decide to take a class. But they have this concept that it's all going to be there.
Right.
And it's not.
Right.
I had a man, a little over a year ago, came into my beginning class, and I take them through step by step. And I certainly use and tell them to use the computer resources that we have today, but use it with caution. Yep. And I tell them the cautions to look at. And he sat through, and I talk about how I got started and the differences, because the average person didn't even have a computer in their own home when I really got started. Right. And so he listened to the first week of lectures, got halfway through the second week of lectures, and he raised his hand and he said, "When are you just going to give us the websites where we can just go download our whole family genealogy and be done with it?" And I stopped and I thought, does he really believe that? And so I had to explain to him, which I had really already done the week before, and I knew he wasn't happy. And he didn't show up for the last two classes because he was unhappy. And it bothers me that unfortunately there are people that happens to, because we can't trust unless there are resources on these online resources. And Ancestry is not the only one. We can't trust any of them to be accurate and be our, definitely be our family, unless we can look at the resources and verify whoever did the research is correct.
So that sort of brings you to the genealogical proof standard, which says you need a reasonably exhaustive research. And that doesn't just mean one document or one census or one birth record, but as many as you can. You really need to look at everything. You need to think about vital records, land, census, tax records, court records, books, historical accounts, all of those things to try to corroborate the information that you have and be able to make sure that you have the right person. Talking about digitization, I mean, we've come a long way, and I actually have to thank the family tree people, the Mormons who have put together the wonderful FamilySearch.org site, Ancestry. I mean, we are miles ahead of where, for instance, you started.
Yes.
But they still are a long way from having everything. Let me just tell you, well, first of all, after 9/11, the federal government told the states that they needed to digitize vital records because many of them had not done that yet.
Yes.
And so they've been working on that. I'm not sure all the states have completed that yet, but they've been mandated to do that. The National Archives has about 6 billion pages of textual records. And their goal is to have 500 million digitized by 2024. That tells you that the archives is filled with stuff that you're not going to find online. Here's one more. The Family History Library. In 2017, they decided to end their microfilm program, as you know. And that means that they were going to not send them out to the different libraries anymore. You had to, either go to the Salt Lake City to get them, or you just had to wait until they got digitized. And their goal was to get everything digitized very rapidly.
By the end of next year is the goal.
Was that the original goal? Well, it's nowhere near that now because it turned out to be a huge process. And I'm told that they've done the books, but there's still plenty of records out there. And not only are they going to, they haven't been digitized, but the ones that have been digitized, they haven't necessarily been indexed. So that means you still have a problem. You just can't pop a name in.
Well, one of the things that is a misconception that I'll step in here, the Family History Library out in Salt Lake and the Utah Genealogical Society has gone all over the world to film records, and they're still doing that. But one of the things, so people come into family history centers thinking they can get everything. One of the problems that the family history centers have is they have to get permission to go in and film all these records. And if the record holder does not allow that, then they don't have that access. They can't do that. As an example, and I don't know why New Jersey specifically did this, but when they microfilmed, when they asked New Jersey if they could film the records, they allowed them to film the vital records that begin in 1848 through 1878. And that's all they allowed them to film. Now, they paid, the state of New Jersey paid for a commercial firm to come in and film the records. So when you go to Salt Lake, or when you used to be able to go online and order film, you could only get the vital records to the end of 1878. Anything else you have to go to the state for. So they have been wonderful in getting all that they can get, but there are record holders that aren't allowing them access to records.
Well, also there are some that allow the access, but but you can only view it if you go to into Family History Center.
Yeah.
And so you will never be able to just use your laptop from home, and be able to access that.
No. But, you know, that's a lot better than not having any access
or having to go through the microfilm.
Or go through the microfilm. And of course, one of the things that you did say, and they are always looking for volunteers. You can do it from home. So I would strongly encourage, if any of our viewers have an interest in indexing records to help the process, go to their website. There's information on how to become an indexer, and that will help to do it. But at least with the current system, as they put things up, as I tell my students, okay, they don't have all of your ancestors' land records indexed, but at least you can get to the volume where your ancestor was and look at the indexes that are in the books. So that's a help for things. But you know, we're coming a long way with the process of getting records and getting them accessible.
And in terms of you know, like states, I know in North Carolina, they've digitized almost all of their records. It's really all their deeds, and some of the wills are there. In Texas, that's not the case. So I still have to go to the courthouse and look at their computers and then be able to get my deeds.
Well, and you just made me think of something. One of the other things is there are records that have been microfilmed that are out there. For example, in New Jersey, the deed records, they basically have done all of them at least to 1900. And those films that the Family History Center had or did are also available in other places. For example, the Historical Society in Gloucester County, New Jersey, that I go to, they have copies of those same films. So don't have to order it from Salt Lake. I don't have to go to Salt Lake. Some of these things may be available through your local public library, interlibrary loan. So that may be, now that we can't get film, that may be a way of getting access to films, you know, again, that you could look at locally. So
the other thing is that, you know, we assume that all the churches have been digitized, and I can tell you that when I go back to Houston, that there's at least 3 churches that I've gone to where it's never been filmed, and they give me this book that is just about to collapse. And I've fortunately been able to get the information, and I actually took pictures of all of the pages. But
and it's so important that those records get filmed in one way or the other. This is Gloucester County Historical Society, and I used to go there a lot. Not as much. I don't get up there as often as I used to, but they had a project where they were contacting cemeteries, churches, and other organizations, asking them to allow them to scan the records. And it's so important that somebody do this. There was one Methodist church that they allowed them over summer to scan all of their records, and the Historical Society had it on a CD, so it was available for their patrons to come in and look at those records. December after that happened, there was a fire in the church after the Christmas Eve service where it literally burnt to the ground. There was nothing but the steel structure left. All those records were gone. Had they not allowed the Historical Society to scan them and put them on a CD, and as soon as the Historical Society found out about it, they made a copy, they took it to the minister's home and gave them their records. So the only things that they lost were probably things they could easily recreate, because it was only from like July or August through December that wasn't current on that CD that they had. So it's so important that not just the Family History Center, but anybody who can scan records to preserve them does that.
Yes, and one of the churches that I'm trying to get, they flooded. And now I'm told, well, they may be there, but they may be so waterlogged that, that you're not going to get anything out of them. So I guess we've made our point that there's just a whole lot of stuff out there that is not online, but it's important to be able to corroborate the information that you have, and be able to make your case as evidence.
Yeah, and like we've said, people think that, okay, I can just go on these different websites and I'm going to find things. And, yes, you're going to find things, but can you trust them is another issue.
Yeah, that's another.
On Ancestry, if you go and you look for my mother's family, there is a family tree for my grandparents, and there are 5 children listed on that family tree. My grandmother never gave birth to those 5 children. They were not my mother's siblings, but I have a distant cousin who has gone on to, where did she get this from was my first question when I looked at it. And one of the problems with people who don't know about research techniques is they look at something on Ancestry and they find something. And she evidently found my grandmother was the head of the household in 1940 with my mother and 4 other siblings living in the household. Well, there's also a list of these records may also be related to that family. But what you have to do is look at the record and determine, is it? What this distant cousin found was there was another Mabel Peyton with 5 children living in New York City. Now, it's obvious my grandmother was born in Pennsylvania. My mother and her siblings that were in the household were born in New Jersey. The oldest 3 were out of the household. They were born in Pennsylvania. This other woman in the 1940 census, the second Mabel Peyton, is living in New York City. She and all her children are born in New York. None of the names match up.
Yeah.
There's the clue.
Yeah.
But she, must be the same person. So she's added them. She also took the oldest child in that household and decided his name happened to be Archie. That's what the A stood for in my mother's oldest brother's name. Instead of, he's a junior, he's Alexander Aird Peyton, named after my grandfather, but she now has him on Ancestry as Alexander Archie Peyton Jr. And my grandfather is Alexander Aird Peyton Sr.
Okay. Well, but this is called casual
research and not understanding the methods.
Well, it's just, I hate to say it's lazy, but in a way, somebody has just said, well, I know what a couple of generations are, but I want to know the names of these other people, and so that person's got it. I'm just going to plaster it in.
I wouldn't say it's lazy. It's uninformed or uneducated in the methods of doing real, actual research
that's probably
that
a
is
kinder
going
way to put
be is going to be accurate.
Yeah, I think that's better.
And I mean, we all start that way. I didn't know about source citations when I got started. So I just grabbed things. And one of the things I have a great uncle. I have a wife, Zelda. I'd have no surname for a maiden name or anything for her. And when I got started, records were restricted. I couldn't get a death certificate for him because there was a 50-year restriction on the death record. And I've since gotten the death certificate, but I could not get access to a lot of records. Census records, when I got started, the 1920 census was the last one I could get a hold of. So 30 and 40 have come along, and 50 I'm anxiously awaiting for 2022 when that's released. But I have this wife, Zelda. I would love to know where I found that name, because when I got his death certificate, I found out he never married. So he didn't have
So where did
any
Zelda
wife.
come from?
But yeah, that's where did Zelda come from? And I have nothing other than I wrote it down in notes. I found it somewhere. But Lord only knows where.
You know, so I think we have agreed that our documentation needs to be very carefully done and, extensive. On the DNA side, this woman told me, sort of going back to the shopkeeper, she told me that she had done her Ancestry DNA. Well, Ancestry DNA is autosomal, and what that means is that you get 50% from your mom, 50% from your dad, and then as it goes back the generations, it gets less and less and less. So you can only go back like 6 or 7 generations. So I don't know how she was able to reach back from a DNA standpoint unless she knew who that ancestor was that linked over to whatever royalty she was looking for. And so really, I want to tell this story, though. There is another DNA that you can do. It's called family tree DNA. And there it measures the mitochondrial, which goes through the mother, and it'll go infinitely up and down the mother line. And then there's the Y, which infinitely goes down the father's line. So there was this king, Richard III, and you've probably read about it. It wasn't that long ago that they found these remains. They were digging up a parking lot in England. They found the remains there. The location and some other things led them to believe that maybe it was Richard III. So what do? So now the royal family's well documented.
Yes.
So there's not much question about that. And so they went to Richard's sister. Now remember, Richard was like in the 1500s, but they knew who she was, and they had documented her line all the way down. So they took the current descendant and tested her for mitochondrial. It matched to Richard's because the mother also gives the son mitochondrial. It just stops there. Okay, so that worked. They did the same thing with the Y, and guess what? It didn't
match.
So they don't know why. Maybe the line broke before he was king, or maybe it broke afterwards. And they'll probably never know. But here again, the documentation now has, you can't take it for granted, because now somebody's going to have to look into that, and I don't know how they're going to do that.
And, there are things that go on today that have gone on for hundreds of years. With DNA, there was a family association that used to enter the National Genealogical Society's newsletter competition every year, and I don't know whether they still do or not, because I'm no longer involved with the competition, but membership in the society or the association was based on descending from one of 5 sons. Well, when DNA came along, all these people in the association started having their tests done, and guess what? People who descended from 2 of the sons didn't match the other 3. So then, and I don't know how it finally was resolved, probably they allowed people to continue as members, but they didn't take anybody in new if they didn't descend from one of the 3 that were proven, and descended from 2 of the ones that were disproven as sons of the original ancestor.
Well, and I think that's what's happening in all of the lineage societies now, because you remember Jeff talked about the problems of trying to get into the Mayflower because the name that person was listed before, and now they've had second thoughts about it. The DAR has done the same thing. there's a good blurb. If you go to the family search website, there is a good blurb about researching what they call the gateway families. And there were about 600 families or names of the original colonial settlers who did have documented lineage back to some sort of royalty in Europe. So my shopkeeper, again, if the shopkeeper was able to find enough documentation to lead them to one of those gateway families, then there's a good possibility that actually occurred.
But the question seems to be, in my mind, is did they know enough to do that? Or are they the casual researcher that doesn't know?
Well, and that's the $64 question. I don't know. I mean, I looked up to see how long, that Henry Gates, Louis Gates show on television, how long does it take them to research something? And they said 600 to 800 hours, which is about 6 months or so. But you notice most of his findings don't lead back to some sort of royalty. Occasionally they do, but not very often.
The problem that I have with those shows is they never show you the failures. And I know a couple of people who have worked on various shows, the one, Who Do You Think You Are, where it just comes to a complete stop. There's no records, no anything to document beyond a certain point, and so they scrap the show.
And they've got the leading people doing the research on those things because they can't afford, to not have good information.
Well, we're just about out of time. Hopefully this will be helpful to our viewers.
I just wanted to say very quickly that if you want to know more about DNA, Blaine Bettinger is one of the leading authors, and you can go on Amazon and look up his books. He's got Family Tree Guide to DNA and also Genetic Genealogy and Practice. It'd be a good way to learn a little bit more about that. And otherwise, thank you very much, Chuck. This has been enlightening.
Janell. Yes, I think it's been enlightening for our viewers, and hopefully they will get a lot out of it. So, yeah, that's the thing is, like I said, with